Thanks, everybody. Just drawing my inspiration from Jason, I have to say that when I was younger, I wanted to grow up and be in a band, and I'm still trying. And I think the last time I was on stage with a microphone, I was singing karaoke, probably really badly, in German. So don't worry, I won't inflict that on you today, but maybe tomorrow night, we'll see. We'll see how the drinks flow. Okay, so as Diraj mentioned, we are Mpirical. We're a technical training company. We specialize in telecoms training. My role within Mpirical normally is as a technical trainer, but I also wear other hats, if you will, within Mpirical. So I've worked on some of our internal systems in terms of development. I also manage some of our cloud infrastructure as well. So quite a multifaceted role, really. And today I'd like to talk to you about network APIs. And if we kind of zoom out and really talk about, really drill down and say, what are APIs? An API, simply put, is a method of allowing applications to talk to each other in a standardized way. So if, for example, you have a website and you need to integrate mapping, for example, or an application that needs to integrate, for instance, for ride sharing, something to do with mapping, you don't build that yourself. You obviously go away and plug into some mapping service, such as Google Maps, for example. And the same for payment gateways, such as Stripe or PayPal. So APIs allow different applications to talk to each other. And in some ways, it's similar to today. When we agree to present, we agree on a common language, a lingua franca, so we speak in English so that it allows everybody the opportunity to understand and to interconnect. And in terms of mobile networks, I think we're at a really exciting time now, because with the development of network APIs, we're now opening up the 5G network and mobile networks to integration with third-party applications. And really, this allows for greater innovation, and it really represents a paradigm shift, if you will. I'm always kind of reluctant to use that term. With operators going from, telecoms networks were always rather siloed, these kind of black boxes, and operators were quite protective over their networks. Now, with network APIs, we're starting to move towards a reality where telcos and techcos are operating in the same space. So I am mindful of time, so we only have 10 minutes to really go through this very, very brief introduction to network APIs. So in essence then, and I apologize, there is a slight formatting issue with these slides. So network APIs in mobile networks, yes, they allow other applications to communicate with the 5G network, so we can extract data from the network, and we'll talk about some common use cases. But we can also influence things in the network, so we can use quality on demand. So for certain applications that demand a particular level of quality of service, for example, so video streaming, cloud gaming services, to give but a few examples, if we need a kind of connectivity boost, we have the ability to contact the network and set up what we call quality on demand. So in terms of the current ecosystem, and I will say before we go any further, this really is dependent on 5G standalone. I know this has been mentioned briefly already. So I think at the last count, we're at something like 73 networks globally that are operating standalone 5G networks. So there is some way to go in terms of implementing this and making a success of network APIs. So in terms of the general ecosystem then, so we have the 3GPP, who hopefully we're all aware of, who have their own APIs. And these APIs really are a really fine level of granularity. And if we're trying to expose these for the use of developers, they're a little bit too complex, to be honest. So this is where Kamara comes in. So Kamara is a kind of collective effort to really simplify and abstract away some of the complexities of the 3GPP APIs, and to really kind of try and drill down and understand the type of use cases that developers, or the type of connectivity that developers require. So we have 3GPP APIs. It's worth also mentioning CAPIF, the Common API Framework. So this really defines a standard for how the APIs should be implemented, including things such as service discovery, authorization and authentication, and also the ability to manage APIs in terms of rate limits and usage and things like that. So I'll talk momentarily about some of these key uses with Kamara APIs. But why do network APIs actually matter? Well, There are a few reasons. This is not an exhaustive list. The first of which I've touched upon already is they accelerate innovation. Now, I don't think as an industry we need to obsess necessarily over we need to come up with all the use cases that are possible. At this stage, we don't necessarily know what the possibilities are, because that's where we say it's over to the developers. So by making these APIs available, mobile networks are really opening themselves up to innovation, and that innovation may not come internally. And it's the same thing that we've seen over the years with web APIs. And as I say, with that increased convergence, we can see the opportunity is there in terms of we open up our mobile networks and we allow this innovation to take place. Secondly, we improve user experience. So as I mentioned at the start, the ability to shape traffic, to have quality on demand. If you're using a streaming service and you're on a mobile network, you have the ability, and this could be handled by the streaming service themselves, it could be handled by the network operator, but we can deliver better service by having finer control over quality of service. So we don't need the complexity necessarily of network slicing, where we want a temporary boost in connectivity. But again, I'll talk about this more when I talk about some specific examples. Now, the third one is quite contentious, and I'll try not to spoil my presentation tomorrow. And the challenge here is how do we monetize not just network APIs, but 5G as a whole? So we've seen already this morning, we've heard some of the challenges in terms of revenue streams related to things such as network slicing, for example. And really the key principle is it promotes interoperability. So the idea behind network APIs is we standardize telco APIs. And we've seen in the past there have been efforts to try and expose APIs from telcos that have failed because of fragmentation. So the idea here is, and I do development work, and developers, I won't say that we're lazy, but we're incredibly efficient. That is the nature of programming. We don't like repeating ourselves. We like to be efficient. We want to write code once and have it run anywhere. So the benefit here is there are efforts to standardize and harmonize the use of APIs in the network. So in terms of some of the organizations we've mentioned already, so I've mentioned that 3GPP really defined the telco grade APIs. And Camara really sits on top of that, and as I say, abstracts away that complexity. And then we also have the efforts of GSMA with Open Gateway that they launched at MWC a few years ago. And really this aims to grease the wheels, if you will, of network APIs, to make it easier to implement, to get organizations and stakeholders working together to ensure that we can build an ecosystem that ensures that network APIs are successful. So in terms of the different domains for APIs then. So these are not strictly API types. There's a bit of a misnomer there at the top of the slide. So we have the network functions involved in exposing APIs. We've got the NEF, the network exposure function in 5G, and we have the SCEF, the service capabilities exposure function in 4G. Now, these are the actual functions within the network that serve to expose these APIs. Whereas, as I've mentioned already, Camara really sits on top of that to make things easier for developers to condense down the use cases. And then we have Captive, which, as I've mentioned already, really defines the framework. But we also have some service-dependent APIs as well. So this service enabler application layer really encompasses use cases across different market verticals where they're more stringent in terms of their requirements. So it's a little bit like developing an app for a mobile phone. Yes, there are lots of libraries and frameworks that we can use to make it easier, but sometimes we need access to those native functions. So we need to dive a little bit deeper. So for things like vehicle to everything, for example, vehicle to everything application enabler, we've got edge applications, and we also have things such as specific applications for uncrewed aerial systems, for example. So we won't talk about these today. These are more specialized APIs. The Camara APIs really are designed to be very much general purpose APIs. And you can see here we've got, I think there's been another release since this release last year. So we've got the stable Camara APIs. These are the APIs where there is a clear use case identified. And we're already seeing this in the market. So things such as SIM swap, which I'll try not to spoil the next few slides, but we're seeing SIM swap being implemented, so we know if a SIM swap has taken place, which is useful for security reasons. And we can see there are some other APIs. So we'll try and talk about some of these. I'm just mindful of the time. We've also got APIs that can be used to subscribe and be event-driven. So many of the APIs that I'll talk about, it's a kind of one-shot deal where you make the API request and you get a response. But we also have the ability to subscribe, and this can be useful for interworking with other systems as well for event notifications. So I just want to draw your attention to really what I would call the key API classes, certainly at present. So we've got location verification. And I really enjoyed the talk from Mario earlier in terms of how, I know it was implemented differently, but in terms of how location verification works, and this is very similar. We've got number verification, so we can actually do away with the need for one-time passes, for example. Quality on demand, which I've mentioned already, and SIM swap again. So with SIM swap, this is problematic. So we know that one of the attack vectors in terms of obtaining access to somebody's bank account, for example, is if we log into internet banking, we are requested a one-time pass. And what an attacker will do is they will try to order a new SIM card, usually via social engineering methods, and they will use that to intercept the one-time pass. And this is a little bit of a problem. So the SIM swap is I like this example because it's a really basic API, but it really has a useful use case. So we pass, or the financial institution passes a SIM swap check request along with the phone number and the maximum age in days. Now, typically, we wouldn't do this over 120 days. It would normally be within the last day or two, possibly up to a week. And the network will then return a response that tells us, in this case, the SIM hasn't been swapped. Because if we think about it, we don't generally change our SIMs that often. So it is a clue that something isn't quite right. Location verification, there are a number of key use cases, some of which actually were touched upon earlier. An interesting one here is drone management. So we can use data based on population density to ensure that we meet regulatory requirements in terms of drone flying. I won't claim to know very much about those, but we get a sense of population density in an area which has an influence on drones being able to fly. We've got retail marketing, the ability to directly target people with advertising, for example, based on their location. Fraud prevention, which we've talked about already, and also asset protection. So with device verification, we pass the device identity. This will generally be the phone number. It could be an IP address. We will define a geographical area, and we'll also set a max age. So we'll set a limit for when should this person be in this area. And we'll get a response that will give the last location time and also the verification result. So is this person within this location? Now, with quality on demand, we have the ability for very, very diverse use cases to be able to request a better quality of service from the network. So, for example, we would see this with video calling. If you had an important video call and you needed to use a cellular network and you want to guarantee connectivity, you can request effectively a connectivity boost from the network. And we can see there are lots of use cases there that we might see. And the idea here is that this is a kind of transient, temporary thing. So this isn't the full bells and whistles of network slicing, for example. This is where we want a time-constrained period of higher quality service. And again, we can see the API call that's made here. We give information about the device. We'll also provide an application server address. And what we do here is we request a particular quality of service profile. So if this use case requires low latency, for example, or if it requires a high data rate, we can request that. And this isn't guaranteed, and really it's still dependent on the quality of service, the quality of signal that you're receiving. So, if you're fading in and out of signal, clearly this is going to have limited use. However, that being said, it does prioritize resources on the network. And then finally, just looking at the wider ecosystem. So, in order for network APIs to be a success, there needs to be, and we are seeing this, a concerted effort to work together. So what we might see is some kind of open gateway facilitated exposure platform. And what we can see is we may see hyperscalers involved here. So we may see these APIs deployed via public cloud services. We may see them deployed in partnership, and we do see this with CPaaS providers, but we may see telcos go in their own direction, particularly for some more high-value enterprise use cases. So there is a degree of flexibility here where we may use a CPaaS provider, but actually there may be some use cases where enterprises will work directly with the operator. Okay, thank you very much. That brings us to the end. Again, I'm happy to hang around during the break if anyone wants to chat, and if anyone wants to chat about your training needs, please feel free to say hello. I am here on my own, so I'm happy for the conversation. Thank you very much.